Welcome everyone to our last class in this section, and indeed of the whole text of the Tanya that this great Kabbalistic master, the Alter Rebbe, published during his lifetime. I'll explain later. But this is a big day. We've been learning for 5 years, some of it recorded and released, some of it just with us here. And this is the last section of the Tanya that the Alter Rebbe published. So it's a big kind of a Siyyum, a big day of completion. And we'll, of course, pull out our Temple Israel Tanya, an official published Tanya that we did by the book. We'll read some of the chapter from that. So let me catch up everyone that is learning with us today. In this section, Igeres Tshuva, which is a tract on Tshuva, we learned about the mystical meaning of Tshuva, which is that we could disconnect the last hey of God's name with our counterproductive actions, with our averas. And Tshuva means tashuv hey, means returning that hey to God's name. The first step, as we learned, is to say, I'm never going to do an avera again, to really commit to that. You can see the classes we taught on that commitment in terms of, well, am I human? Does it mean that I'll mess up in the future? It makes no difference. Once that you have that commitment, that's tshuva tata. You apologize to people, apologize to God, and God is able to forgive infinitely, immediately, and Yom Kippur finishes the deal. So that's tshuva tata. That puts me, as we said, into a state as I was before I ever sinned. So Michael Smolash was once an innocent little baby, and everybody looked at the baby and was full of wonder and awe, and my soul was just there, and how could I have done a sin? I'm so innocent. That state is accessible to me right now by the process of tshuva tata. Then the Alter Rebbe says, but now that you're back like a tzaddik, like you were before you sinned, that's still you. There's still a you who's like you were before you sinned. Total union with God goes beyond that, where you lose that sense of you, of being a separate being. For that, we learned Torah with love and awe and other techniques. That reunites us with God and connects to the first hey of God's name. And there we're like the breath that was breathed into me before it left God. So there I'm no longer even a being. There I have complete bittul, complete surrender. And that's tshuva ilah, the higher tshuva. And whereas the first is characterized by bitterness and sorrow, the second is characterized by joy. In the last chapters, we're looking at how to really leverage and maximize my state of joy, even in the face of the reality that there's things I've done that were counterproductive. And the Alter Rebbe said, the key is what King David said, I keep my sins always before me. I keep my sins always before me. It doesn't mean I'm beating myself up every morning because of something I did when I was 20, or maybe something I did last week or last month. What it means is, I'm aware of it, I know it's there, but I keep it there. And the Alter Rebbe said, lenegdi means in front of me, but at a distance. So not big in the screen of my mind, but as we did last week, far off, simple, maybe a black and white file of it. It's there to remind me, it's not there to depress me. And what that will allow me to do, we learned in chapter 11, is that this joy that I need to have to serve God properly, now the sins will allow that joy to continue. Because when something happens, I can be reminded, well, I have sins, those sins need scouring, and this is part of that. And we'll go much deeper into that idea, right? But it will give me a sense of humility. Okay, who am I to think that I don't deserve any bumps in life? I've done things that need repair, so this is helping with that. And B, it's actually helping my soul. And we're going to go powerfully into that idea in this chapter. Now comes along chapter 12, the last chapter in the entire Tanya, as I said, that the Alter Rebbe published. And we're going to go really into the stratosphere in terms of managing joy, and managing joy in the face of suffering. And that is because until now we've basically said suffering shouldn't get in the way of your joy. If I have my sins in front of me at a distance, now something happens in life, there's suffering, big or small, I can maintain my state of joy because I have my sins in front of me. They won't, and the suffering won't interfere with my joy because the sins allow for that. But it's really just saying they're not going to disturb the suffering. In this chapter, the Alter Rebbe goes into a very profound concept, and not an easy concept. Not that suffering shouldn't disturb joy, but that suffering can be the source of joy. Right? It's not that suffering won't get in the way of my flow of joy, but the suffering itself can be a source of joy, can create joy. We've touched on this idea a few times. It's a deep Hasidic idea, a Kabbalistic idea. So before we begin, let me say, as I said last week, two big conditions for putting this technique into place in my own life, and I'd suggest in your lives. That is, one, I only apply this to myself, period, end of story. I only apply this to myself. So God forbid I should walk around and look at someone else's suffering and say, oh, they should be happy in their suffering. That is not what Jews do. That is not what the Alter Rebbe teaches. That's a horrible thing to do, right? We should never do that. This is for me and me alone. Perhaps if you have a family, you have children, this is something you teach your children. If someone comes to you to learn as a real student, you can share this with them, but only if they've asked for that. But no one should ever, God forbid, say, okay, look at someone else's suffering, I can explain why they're suffering, or they should be happy. No. And B, it does not apply to something currently happening or something that could happen in the future. You don't look at something that's going on at the moment and say, oh good, this suffering is going to help me, or not avoid suffering in the future, God forbid, because ultimately it's for the good. No. In Judaism, we are a partner with God, and we want to protect ourselves, protect our community, do everything we can to stay safe, avoid suffering. But once it's past that line of the present and it's in the past, I think you and I can agree, now there's nothing I can do to avoid it anymore. Now we say, it's in the past, that makes it divine providence. Now I can use this technique and use that past suffering, it could be the last 10 seconds, or it could be the last 10 years, and actually generate joy out of that suffering using this technique. So is that clear? Those two parameters are really important in Judaism, otherwise you go into very strange territory. So let's begin. I do want to read a few lines from our own Tanya, because we published this right here at Temple Israel as one of the campaigns of the last Rebbe of this system, to print Tanyas everywhere you can. So this is an official edition of the Tanya. You can get a close-up of that for anyone who finds that hard to believe, but we actually did it, and there it is. Mwah! Right? So Perek Yud Bet, V'tama simcha b'sarei haguf lefi shehi tova gdola v'atzoma lenefesh hachotet. Go ahead.
For the reason of joy in the suffering of the body.
And one more.
Is that it is great and potent favor for the sinning soul.
Lemarka b'olam hazeh.
To cleanse it in this world.
Right. So now we say the reason for joy in the suffering of the body. Right. So now it's not that the suffering is not going to get in the way, but we actually can have joy in the suffering. And specifically, we start with suffering in the body. So I have a headache, I stub my toe, and for starters, let's start with the minor suffering, right? So I get a toothache, or I lost some hair and it's embarrassing me, or whatever's going on in my life. Let's not get into I lost an arm, or worse, God forbid. But that still applies. The Alter Rebbe says, better that's my body suffers than my soul suffers. Right? Better my body should suffer than my soul suffers. Let's take as a given the understanding that once I'm done 120 years, even if I've done tshuva and I'm a tzaddik and I'm back, there's still the residue of the sins in my soul, and that needs to be scrubbed off. That's widely understood. The Ramban talked about it in his introduction to Job. That's a very old Jewish idea and a very understood Jewish idea, that living in a world as a soul, it disconnects you from your natural state, and just experiencing the world through physicality, that in itself leaves residue. And then when all the little affairs that we do, whether it's telling a story or holding a grudge, or we talked about walking by somebody that needs money and not giving them money each time, all these little things, as well as perhaps the big ones, God forbid, they add up, and even after tshuva, there's residue. So Gehenna is there. There's an intermediate state before I'm in Gan Eden, let's hope, right? God willing. But there's a state in Gehenna where the soul is repaired, restored, but it's described as being very uncomfortable for the soul. Because there, it's the world of truth. There, you see exactly what you did. You see the potential you had that you missed. You see the harm you did in its full force and the entire impact of it. And really the extreme of seeing the good I could have done that, I missed out. And the damage, let's call it, that I did in its full force is very uncomfortable for the soul. It's described, we'll see, as 60 times as extreme as pain in this world. Fire in this world is like 1/60th of fire in Gehenna. So it's coming. Most of us are going to go through this process of having the soul repaired. It's good for the soul. It gets the soul back to its natural state, but it's not fun for the soul, right? So better, that my body should have some bumps than that after, when I'm in a much more sensitive state, my soul should need to go through it, right? So that's simple. It's happening in my body, saves my soul from that business. But B, as we'll see, it's actually better to cleanse it in this world than in the next world. The soul itself. It's better to cleanse it in this world than in the next world, for reasons we'll go into.
But didn't you just say that if we cleanse it in this world, there's still residue?
Yeah, so it's in degrees. It's not, I guess on occasion it's like you're done, you're completely cleansed, you skip Gehenna, you go straight to heaven, but it's a matter of degrees. So if I have to spend 6 days in Gehenna, then maybe my soul gets cleansed in this world, it gets down to 5 days or 4 days in Gehenna, right? So it's a balance. Lehatzila meha meruk begehenna. Go ahead.
And to spare it from being scoured in Gehenna.
So this is, if you ever think back to like the fire and brimstone preachers and trying to put the fear of God into little towns in America, we don't believe in hell. Hell doesn't exist. Everything is God's plan. We don't believe in a devil that's against God. But there is a process, a natural result of us being a soul and a body where we need cleansing, and that's the process. And it is something you should be very respectful of. It's not. It's painful, is what it's called. Bifrat bedortenu ela ele.
This is particularly true in these generations of ours.
She'en bicholet lehitanot kfi mispar kol hatzamot shebetikunej tshuva meharizal zichrono livracha.
When one cannot endure all the fasts prescribed in the penances of the Arizal.
Right, and we learn those in chapter 3. Ha'tzrichot lemeruk hanefesh l'hatzila memeruk begehenum.
Fast imperative for the cleansing of the soul to rescue it from the cleansing of Gehenna.
So you remember in chapter 3, the Alter Rebbe described different kinds of fasts and different practices that would spare us from the different cleansings in Gehenna. And there's snow and being thrown from one end of the cosmos to the other. There's all these different repairing techniques that happen in Gehenna. And there's ways you can avoid them. And the last Chabad Rebbe also said, if you say Tehillim every day and learn this much Torah while you're walking around, the different practices people would do that were taught and understood by the great masters, that if you really want to finish life and your soul goes up and they say, all done, straight to Gan Eden, no Gehenna for you, you really want to skip it entirely, there's ways to do it, but it involves a lot of work. And one of them is fasting. And the Arizal described many, many fasts, how people of earlier generations would fast to really wipe their souls clean. And they understood that meant, although they were suffering in this world, they were going to suffer a lot less in Gehenna. And so they saw it really as a joyful thing to do, not as a suffering thing to do. Ramban, we don't hear a lot from the Ramban in the Tanya, so this is nice. Zichrono livracha b'hakdama leferush oyev Iyov, she'afilu yusarim shel Iyov ayin shana ein lahen erech klal yisurei hanefesh sha'a achat Gehenna. So look out.
As Nachmanides writes in the introduction to his commentary on Job, that even the sufferings of Job for 70 years bear absolutely no comparison to the suffering of a soul for even 1 hour in Gehenna.
So if you need an image to reinforce that Gehenna is something that, to minimize the amount of time I spend there, is a big favor. This is what the Ramban wrote. So I'm not now finding some strange Kabbalistic personality. The Ramban is a big Kabbalist, but is a universally recognized source. And he says, look at what happened to Job. Job, 70 years of suffering, and he was a tzaddik. Job did everything right. You look at Job and you're like, how could a bad thing happen to that good person? He was, probably the tzaddik of his generation. And he lost all 10 children, God forbid. He lost all of his wealth and became a pauper. And then when Satan and God were still arguing, Satan's like, no, it doesn't prove it. It wasn't enough. God's like, go ahead. Gave him a terrible affliction, boils, a painful, painful disease for 70 years. Of course, we know the end. Job said, no, I'm still a tzaddik. I'm going to bless God. Job didn't give in, and Job proved that he was beyond a tzaddik, if that's possible. But that is a comparison for us to say all those 70 years of unimaginable suffering, Nachmanides said, that's easier than 1 hour or even just 1 moment to Gehenna, depending on how you translate sha'achat. Right? So really, the suffering we experience in this world, Gehenna is many times amplified, and it's hard to even find a comparison. Right? So that's to put in our minds, if I can avoid that, thank you, right? Someone pushes me out of the way of a car and I scrape my knee on the way down. I'm not going to tell them, how dare you scrape my knee? I'm going to say, oh my God, thank you. You saved me from getting hit by a car. Hugs and kisses, and who can I donate charity to? Thank you. So it's a big favor to avoid this Gehenna business. I see some lowered eyes and some scowls here. Don't worry, we'll finish on a high note.
I hope so.
We're good? Why? Ki esh echad mishishim v'chulu.
That's me. For physical fire is but 1/60th of the fire of Gehenna.
Right. So this is from the Talmud. So again, this is universally understood in Judaism that if you have to endure fire in Gehenna to scour you, right? They take the blowtorch, like, okay, we're getting it all off of you, Smolash. We're gonna clean you up. Right? I'm like, it's really hot. That is going to be, fire on earth is 1/60th of that experience. And numbers, we're very exact with numbers in North America. We're like, okay, 1/60th, that's what degree? It's not like that. 1/60th means insignificant, right? The concept of batal b'shishim, of nullified in 60, where in food, if I splash a little milk by accident into a soup, if it's less than 1/60th, it's nullified, it's not there, it's still kosher. The chicken soup is kosher even though some milk splashed in it. Because 1/60th, that's the amount when it's basically insignificant. So 1 in 60 means that fire on earth, the pain you'd feel, is like nothing compared to fire in Gehenna. That's what 1/60th means. So again, we're reinforcing, the only reason the Alter Rebbe is giving us these images is the joy we'll feel at being able to sidestep and avoid them. Ela, and this is a great idea, Lafi she'olam hazeh chesed yibaneh.
It is only that this world is built by kindness.
And we love this phrase, and we sing, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, and it's a feel-good idea that the world is built on love, on kindness, and that God loves us, and that's the core. And that's fine. It's nice to just vibe on love and get that love is the first midah in this world. But here we're talking about a spiritually dynamic reality that's good to understand. In the physical world, the dominant attribute is chesed. So as if you could go through the spiritual worlds and come down to the physical world, and you could see what was radiating, which light was the strongest light, which light was the one that included all the others and was the main light of that world, that was flowing into that world, giving its life force. In the higher worlds, it's Gevura. In the higher world, it's Gevura, truth, justice. Call it justice, not truth, but strength and justice. That means my soul, as it exists in the higher worlds, right and wrong is perfectly clear. It's black and white, a judgment happens and judgment is fixed. And in the higher worlds, when I'm there, that's why we picture a soul standing in front of a scale, and the scale is very exact, because that's the nature of the higher world. They're dominated by the light of Gevura, of strength and of justice. But as you go down, we learn tradition, God realized right away, and we probably realized too, if this physical world was dominated by Gevura, then it would just end, it would be destroyed. Because look around us, we're all doing the wrong thing, we're all messing up, we're all hypocritical, we have wars throughout history. If you looked at the human existence, genuinely from the perspective of Gevura, God would just wipe it out. So God said, no, this world, the physical world, is dominated by chesed, and here you get a lot of slack, you get forgiven, you get everything in this world is infused with kindness and with love, and that's the main midah of this world, this physical world. So that's a nice idea, but recognize it's also a once-in-a-lifetime, literally, opportunity. Because your soul was up in the spiritual worlds and was recognizing right and wrong and halacha and averas, and it was very clear. You come down here and suddenly you can accomplish so much more, because really, as we'll see, every good thing you do is amplified, and every negative thing you do is limited by the chesed that dominates this world. That's the dynamic that lets us recognize what happens when I experience some unavoidable suffering in this world, right? Let's go in the Alter Rebbe's words. Uvisurin kalin ba'olam hazeh nitzol midinim kashim shel olam haba.
For which reason, through mild suffering in this world, one is saved from severe judgment in the coming world.
Right, so in the coming world, it's all going to be laid out. God's going to say, okay, yeah, you had every advantage, Smolash, you learned Torah, you learned Hebrew, you grew up in a good family, and then you went and you did these things. You're responsible for it. So here's the judgment, and here's Gehenna, and we're going to fix this, but it's a big deal. It's not going to be fun for you, right? Whereas here, that whole experience collapses into, they gave me the wrong coffee, and I'm upset, right? The Talmud even talks about that this phenomenon applies. In other words, my soul is spared from scouring Gehenna, even from little inconveniences. The example the Gemara gives is, if I'm looking for a coin in my pocket, I need a nickel and I pull out a dime. Oh, annoying, right? It's not really suffering, but even that little bump, that will erase a lot of scouring Gehenna. Why? Because this world is built on kindness. This world is built on kindness. And if it's that case with little annoying aspects of life, imagine what it's like with real pain. Imagine how much suffering I'm spared of this scouring Gehenna when something really hits me that causes physical pain, psychological pain. And so what's my stance now? Before I read this, perhaps my stance was, poor me. That really hurt. That didn't need to happen. There's no reason for it. And now I, today, my beautiful son went to get a haircut, and he has these gorgeous big curls that he got really, into. And, sometimes you go to a hairdresser and they just one of these, right? God bless her. It's the same woman. And I saw him this morning. He had close to tears in his eyes that he had to go to school. He thought he looked horrible, and he's such a handsome guy. He looks so great. In 20 years, he's going to look back and realize there was no way he could look anything but wonderful. He's just this bloom of youth, But he's just so much psychological pain for him to go to school with his haircut that he dislikes. And I, hugged him. I'm sorry. It'll grow back. Say all these things, but he is, he has to go through this. He's going to have to walk the halls of his school with his short haircut. And so we're saying something like that, where he's actually experiencing pain. That could be reframed in his mind as, this pain I'm experiencing, it's actually saving me a tremendous amount. In fact, it's a big favor. It's a big favor.
So if somebody's really sick,
Mm-hmm.
does that give them a pass? They're here on Earth and their body is physically being eaten away. All these people that have cancer and break bones and have tumors. Is that suffering here on earth opening an opportunity so that they don't suffer or spend a lot of time in Gehenna?
So like I said, I can't speak to someone else's suffering, right? I can't explain someone else's suffering. That's not what this is here for, right? So my only thing I say, and my wife treats people with cancer, and I see, every month kind of the things people go through, and my only answer is, I'm praying to God that they are healed. I'm praying to God that they're out of pain. That's my response to people who have cancer, people that are suffering.
Okay.
That's the only response I can have. I'll say, if I had, God forbid, had some disease this past year and had gone through pain, now this is here for me to reframe that pain and get joy out of it and say, oh, that really sucked. Imagine that times 60, right? So that's what I avoided, right? And if I can genuinely understand that, now it's not like, God forbid, going through chemotherapy or pain or whatever is not physically painful, but I can derive joy out of it, and at a certain point even relish the amount of discomfort that I had, because now for me it has meaning, it has purpose, and it's God really doing me a favor, because yeah, I did have sins, and wow, this did a great job of getting rid of all that. And when I'm at 120 and I'm now going through the process, I'm going to look back and say, oh, God was looking out for me, right? But that's just for me. That's not for. I'm not going to talk about disease in the world and if it has a purpose. That's not the idea here.
Okay.
This is me, myself, and I. Those three people.
Thank you. That helps get me back on track.
Yeah. And now, I love this metaphor. This really hammers it home beautifully. Kimshal hiluch v'hatakat hatzel ba'aretz tefach.
This is analogous to the movement on a shadow of the shadow on earth of a hand's breadth.
Lefi hiluch galgal hashemesh barakia alafim milin v'chulu.
Which equals the sun's movement in the sky of thousands of miles.
And so imagine I have this shofar, right? And it's resting, and it has a shadow. And now over the course of a few hours, the shadow moves a few hand breadths, maybe 45 minutes, right? It'll move 6 inches or so, right? 7 inches, a couple hand breaths. So I'm looking down and I'm saying, the shadow just moved 7 inches. But the source of the shadow is the sun. And relative to me, how far did the sun have to move relative to me for this shadow to move 7 inches? Right. Vast amount of space, right? It's almost incomparable how far the sun has to move to get a shadow to move that far. The Alter Rebbe is saying that's what's going on here. Yeah, you had suffering down here in the physical world, but understand the suffering you avoided in the spiritual world and the suffering you avoided in Gehenna is so much more. It's like the sun moving however many thousands of miles relative to this shadow. Make sense? So again, we really can amp this up. And this is between me and myself, so there's really no negative I can see in me fully engaging with this lens, this idea. What did we call it last week when you put this filter? And reframing anything in my past, right? Stuff that's here that's getting in the way of my joy because I feel like, God forbid, a victim. I feel like a failure. I feel like you name it. And now my joy is only at 10% of what it could be. Okay, let me take all that stuff. Let me recognize however much discomfort or pain I experienced, God was carefully looking out for me, crafting this experience to help in advance so that I'm going to avoid much more suffering, and I can be grateful and joyful for every moment that I experienced in the past myself. Another image might be going to an oral surgeon, right? You ever go in for like a major oral surgery and have like wisdom teeth pulled out? And imagine what that was like before we had anesthetics, right? I mean, I guess they'd get you drunk or something, but I mean, you had major teeth being pulled out of bones and the nerves that are there. Like, people had to endure agony. I mean, you really must have had like a terrible infection to go to a dentist or barber and have them yank these things out. Now what do? We go in, it's gonna hurt. You're gonna feel a little prick, and then the needle goes in. I'm like, it hurt, and then I feel nothing, and I hear the grinding and the crunching, and we're joking around, and oh my God, I avoided so much pain. So let me ask you, if I was a 5-year-old and I saw this needle, and I was so afraid, and then I felt the pain, and I'm crying, a 5-year-old might experience tremendous stress at getting that first needle. Agreed?
Sure.
Yeah. What don't they understand?
What's coming next?
Yeah. They don't understand that needle is a kindness. The moment they reach maturity and they recognize, we're pulling stuff out of my bones here. This is going to be unimaginably painful. That needle, bring it on. Like, a little, thank you, doctor, right? Now I can sit back and relax and get the surgery. That little moment of pain is a blessing. And thank God I live in a time when I can have that little amount of pain replace, unimaginable physical discomfort. So you're grateful, right? I'm great. Imagine you showed up to an oral surgeon and said, "Sorry, we're out of painkiller today. So is it okay? We'll do the surgery without it." You'd be like, "No, go get it. What are you talking about? I want my painkiller. That's for me, right?" Right? It's like this is a kindness.
You are.
I'm going to the dentist today, I hope.
God willing, it's smooth and easy. Yeah. But that's what this is. If we can reframe all suffering that has happened to me, if I can reframe that, it's basically like an anesthetic that's taking away this tremendous amount of discomfort that my soul is lined up for, is in store for. It's got it on, it's on the conveyor belt coming my way, and this is just taking it right off. And taking off so much more than I experienced in this world. Now, okay, I'm not saying that I wasn't in pain, but I can have joy from that pain.
Thanks, that's helpful.
ויתר על כן, לאין קץ הוא בנמשל. Go ahead. I think Dan, go ahead.
Infinitely more so is this true in the parallel.
בבחינת השתלשלות העולמות מרום המעלות עד עולם הזה הגשמי.
And the descent of the worlds from level to level, from the most exalted heights until this physical world.
Right, so even if this example, the shadow, seemed like almost an infinite difference, right? Who can compare, whatever, a few inches compared to the distance that a star has to move relative to us in the cosmos, may as well be nothing. Still, these are finite numbers. And however much the sun and the earth move relative to each other, that's still a finite number. And the difference between the physical world and the spiritual worlds is an infinite leap. An infinite leap. So no matter how much we try to explain that a little suffering in this world takes away a lot of suffering in the higher worlds, you really can't find a proper parallel because an infinite leap is different than any finite leap. Right? So as much as we can, we're always going to have more we can do to understand the favor God's doing to us by sufferings I've had. וכנודע ממה שכתוב בזוהר הקדוש מעניין עליות העולמות העליונים בהתערותה דלתתה בהקרבת עוף אחד בין יונה או תור על גבי המזבח או קומץ מנחה.
We see this in the teachings of the Zohar on the elevation of the higher worlds.
One more. Go ahead.
As a result of the spiritual rising initiated by man below through his offering of one fowl, dove or pigeon, or a handful of meal on the altar.
So now we're going to go back to the positive. And now that we recognized this world is, the leverage from this world to the spiritual worlds is an infinite leap, and that any amount of pain I endure here, that is going to erase a tremendous amount of pain above. The same also holds on the positive side. Right? The same exponential effect, let's call it, is the same on the positive side. I may feel like, not a big deal, I woke up, I'm in the habit of putting $1 in my pushka. Right? Not a big deal, I woke up and I said the Shema. Right? Just as a habit, it takes nothing, right? How could this be a big deal? The same applies. Any positive thing we do, any mitzvah, the emotional, the physical, you name it, also creates a tremendously amplified effect above. And here he says, we learn from the Zohar how it's not just that you create light in the higher worlds when you offer a single dove or offer just one handful of flour on the altar, right? I mean, how much good could that possibly do? A little handful of flour on the altar. It's part of what we do on the festivals. I do it. I did my sacrifice. I'm good. And he says, no, all the spiritual worlds, every one of them experiences an elevation. You're raising up entire worlds from the effect of just offering one handful of flour. Or in our case, saying a blessing over a cup of coffee and then learning some Torah with it. Or doing another person a favor, you name it. So we can use this not just to reframe my past sufferings and bring joy out of them. I can also use this to really relish, understand, celebrate, and encourage myself in terms of any mitzvah that I do, no matter how seemingly small, because the effect is leveraged in the same extraordinary way, right? V'chen hu b'chol hamitzvot masiyot kanoda meharizal.
Is it me?
Yeah.
Okay. Such are, is that where we are?
Yeah.
Yes.
Such are the effects of all the commandments requiring practical performance, as is known from the Arizal.
And so the cause and effect of practical mitzvahs, as we've learned, performances of mitzvahs, is the cause has no relation to the effect. It's beyond exponential, right? And again, we're here in the physical world. It's nothing. These mitzvahs are everywhere. We go ahead and do. We're learning Torah now. If we could see the elevations that are happening in the higher worlds, we'd be blown away. We'd be dancing from joy that we have the ability, all that because this world is based on chesed. Chesed is the dominant flow, right? So I get a bump, it erases some agony in the future world. I do a little mitzvah, it elevates all the spiritual worlds and creates tremendous light above. And it's only here in the physical world that that's the case, that chesed dominates to that extent. V'zehu shamru Rabbeinu Zivachem Nevracha Razal al pasuk v'hit kadishtem v'hitem kedoshim. Go ahead, Noreen. Doreen.
Oh, we're
Dan.
Oh,
you're
Dan.
doing this one.
I think it would be.
I lost track also.
Okay. This too is our sage's comment on the verse, sanctify yourselves and you shall be holy.
And so this verse, sanctify yourselves, like do a mitzvah, say a blessing, and you will be holy. We learn Adam mekadesh atzmo me'at milmata mikadshinoto harbe milmala v'chulu.
Man sanctifies himself only a little, comments the Rebbe, in quality, below the comments of the Rebbe in quantity, and becomes sanctified in the great measure from above.
And so when we do something, any mitzvah here below, we become sanctified in a tremendous exponential effect above. וכמו שנתבהר לעיל בעניין אשר קידשם במצוותיו וכו' בחינת סובב כל המין וכו'.
It was thus noted above in reference to the phrase, who sanctified us with his commandments, that Israel's sanctification through mitzvot is bound up with the infinite life force that encompasses and transcends all worlds.
So these are ideas we've gone into, and again, this paragraph you could do a 6-month class on. But Kodesh, we call it holiness, right? In English, I'm not sure what holiness means. Kodesh refers to the light that is unable to interact with reality, that is so high that it cannot enter or relate to reality in any way. I don't mean physically it doesn't enter, it's infinitely abstract. So Sovev Kol Amin, that light is everywhere, but it's so above me that I can't relate to it all. It's right here, I'm within it right now, but it has no relationship with me. As opposed to Mamale Kol Amin, the light that fills the worlds, that's the light that becomes a shofar and a book and a table and a smolash. That's creative light that's actually adapting itself to any aspect of creation. When something is Kodesh, Kodesh means literally separate, apart from. So this surrounding light of God is so holy, so godly, that it's separate from the world. It can't relate to the world. That's the light that any mitzvah we do becomes infused with, and that's the light we become infused with when we do any mitzvah. And as we said, when we say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, who made us kodesh with these commandments. Kitshanu b'mitzvotav, and also the idea we said of Kiddushin, that we're like married to God through this commandment. So I said a blessing when I started drinking this coffee, and I just rattled it off. Maybe I had a little kavanah. I was like, okay, I have some love and some awe. But who am I kidding? Did I recognize that I'm taking a light that is so lofty that it's surrounding the spiritual and physical worlds, that now I'm infused with that light? No, I couldn't recognize that. But my soul knows that's the case. And after 120 years, when we're now in Gan Eden, now we see the light that we brought into the world. So it's real, even if I'm oblivious to it pretty much. So that kodesh, that separateness, that sovet kol amin, that's the light that we become infused with any mitzvah. So there's no more superlative description one could give to show that the cause of us doing a little mitzvah down here and the effect of all the spiritual worlds being elevated and of the sovev kol amin light coming down and infusing us, you can't find a bigger discrepancy between the cause and the effect. So again, this is not just about the negative, that I'm going to reframe suffering and be joyful because of it. It's also now really about the positive, that it's unbelievable the opportunity we have to just get up and do a mitzvah, to learn Torah, and to be Jewish here at Temple Israel. Does that make sense? Big idea. Yeah, good. Bechacha mamashu b'inyan sachar ve'onesh. I'm going to guess where we are. I have no idea. Precisely.
So it is in reference to the reward and punishment.
Right? And that it's not really reward and punishment. It's just the effect of my actions, the direct effect of my actions. Right? So I did sins. That's going to lead to these bumps, and that's God, because God is all about kindness in this physical world. God's like, okay, you messed up, I get it, let me take care of it. And let me take care of it. You're going to feel a little bit here, but that's going to erase a lot later, trust me. And if you understand the favor, you're going to be really happy about this. Why not, right? And also reward, right? This is not a system where I do something good and God's like, okay, let me get a lollipop out of the machine and give it to you, Smolash, as a reward. The reward is actually that the mitzvah that I did brought this light into the world and elevated the worlds. That itself, that's the nature and definition of the mitzvah, is the reward. And we'll finish again in our own Tanya here as we finish the chapter. I'm very excited. This is a nice moment. Right? Kamar Rabbeinu Zichron Livracha. Where am I in here?
Is it?
Kamar, yeah. Sachar mitzvah, uchmosh katuv v'chulu. Uchmosh katuv b'makom acher v'dat lenavon nakal u'maskil al davar yimtza tov.
As our sages say, the reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah, as discussed elsewhere. This knowledge is elementary to the discerning, and those with intelligence in this matter will discover good.
So this is from Pirkei Avot. The reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. The plain meaning is that, okay, you do one mitzvah, then you get in the habit, you'll do another mitzvah, right? You give charity, maybe now you'll be nice to somebody, right? So the plain meaning is, do one mitzvah, it's going to lead to a second mitzvah, then a third, and that's your reward. The Hasidic and Kabbalistic meaning is, schar mitzvah, don't think that you're doing the mitzvah to get a separate reward, right? We're not children here, that God is, God's got I got a strap in case you do something wrong, and then I got a lollipop jar when you do something right, and because I commanded you to do this, now I'm going to give you the lollipop because you did it. It's not that at all. These commandments are ways we connect to God ways we get God's will to flow in the world, and ways we get that infinite light, that surrounding light, to actually come and infuse our lives. And that is the mitzvah. That's the definition of the mitzvah. And the mitzvah itself is its own reward, because that's what it causes. So we don't need some idea that you know, God's like now you know, putting a check on my record, or that God's giving me some separate reward. It actually comes directly out of the mitzvah. So this actually gets us to the end of, that's the entire Tanya right here that the Alter Rebbe published in, well, yeah, that's right, in his lifetime. All the rest of the letters and things that are at the back here, that was added by his children after his death. So we've now learned at Temple Israel the entire Tanya, every section of the Tanya. Not all of it's online. We started with Shar Yichud V'Emunah before we started broadcasting, but this is a beautiful time that we finished really one of the most Kabbalistic texts, and we printed it out and we learned it here. I'm wishing everyone, as we get to Yom Kippur, and I'm going to try and broadcast this right before Yom Kippur, that you should have ksiva v'chesima tova. You should be really go through tshuva in the ways that we've learned, have a successful Yom Kippur, and come out on the other side with absolute joy, and join us in this practice. And just maybe one last idea. I'm now pulling from Tully Silberberg, who teaches out of New York, and he talked about this. And it's easy when you get to the end of a big book, and there was lots of ideas. You can kind of like get lost in all the details of each chapter and not get the big thing. So what's one of the big ideas here? Tshuva, whether it's tshuva tata or tshuva ila'ah, lower or higher, we think about it sometimes as, I did things counterproductively, now I'm fixing it, now I'm doing different things. I'm not doing those things that I'm doing mitzvahs. And that it's just me maybe at 30%, and now it's me at 90%, or something like that. I'm just having a better year, right? I've improved myself. That's actually not the definition of tshuva. We're not improving ourselves. The definition of tshuva is that we're changing our status so that we are a different person. We're changing our status so that we are a different person. Right? So it's not that there's all these sins that I did, and now I was really sorry, and I apologize to people and to God, and I had a feeling like I'm not going to do it again, and that gave me the emotional strength the next year to be the same person but just not do those sins, right? And I'm just, I'm white knuckling it. I'm that same person, and it's in my nature to do sins, but I'm white knuckling through the next 3 months, and I'm keeping my status. I haven't given in, I haven't done it, and I'm the same person. It's not that. What it is we don't want to look and focus on the averas truly, on the counterproductive activities we did. We want to focus on who we are. Because when I do that lower level tshuva, and I say, that's it, I am not going to do any more sins, period. That's who I am now. It's not about an individual sin that I should feel bad about, or an individual sin that I'm going to somehow avoid. It's about a Jewish person, a Yid, has a spark of God in them. We should be a servant of God. We should have the feeling of awe in terms of our life and who we are, and it should be impossible for us to sin. If we really understood what we were and who we were, that we're an actual spark of God walking around the world living, and God wants this stuff and God does not want this stuff, it'd be impossible. If we really saw the truth of who we are, it'd be impossible. If I'm a servant of God, if I'm an eved of God, by definition, I don't sin. So my focus is not on feeling bad about the avera or having enough fear that I avoid doing the avera, even though it's me. That's the symptom. The cause is I'm now a servant of God. That's my definition. That's who I am. Therefore, are you kidding me? How would I sin? What would cause me to do that? I'd have to redefine myself again. So tshuva is resetting my status, redefining myself as that being who I was before I ever sinned, and redefining myself as a servant of God, where it's not about one avera or another, or having the willpower not to. It simply is off the shelf, right? And yeah, I get it. We have free will. We can now redefine ourselves backwards and become someone who has to struggle with all that. But that is the true definition of tshuva, right? And we have now two levels: tshuva tata, which we understand; tshuva ila'a, which is a beautiful thing to aim at. And I'll finish by saying, even though it feels a little beyond us, this tshuva ila'a and the joy of tshuva, that the last Rebbe of this Chabad lineage said, now, after the 20th century, after everything we've been through, this is the generation that should focus basically on tshuva ila'a, regardless of the past, regardless of my feelings about my qualities. I can go ahead and just learn Torah with love and awe and accept that flow of being really one with God's breath before God breathed it into me. Try and just go ahead and have the joy that I've nullified myself. We as a people have done everything we need to do to tip the scale of history. Been a pleasure learning with you guys. This is really a fun thing for me. I'm wishing you a wonderful Yom Kippur. And by the way, in terms of Yom Kippur, if you're watching this right beforehand, we are doing an optional full-length extreme fast here at Temple Israel. It's going to be about 25 and a bit hours if you want to join me for that. So feel free to just pop by, tap me on the shoulder, say you want to join. I'll have a nice break fast. You can join us. We'll do until 8:07. We'll be, I think, right here in this room learning and doing the longest traditional fast. If you can't do that, there's other money not to leave on the table on Yom Kippur. For instance, if you can't do the full-length fast for any reason, just not wearing leather shoes, that is a traditional part of Yom Kippur that can add a lot. So take a pair of sneakers with no leather, and now you're adding another piece. Another is not to put any ointments or lotions on. That's a formal part of Yom Kippur, just like fasting. Also not having intimacy, physical contact, so you just make a deal with your partner or your family. I'm not hugging, I'm not saying hello, I'm not kissing, that comes later. And of course not showering, not washing. So it's not just a fast, there's all kinds of other levels we can put on that if you can't fast for medical or other reasons, those add tremendous value. So I'll invite people to maybe take one or two of those on, between shoes, not putting on lotions, not washing, and no physical intimacy. You add that to the fast, of course, and now it's a very powerful kapara, very powerful cleansing effect, just like everything we've been learning. So, sei gesund. We will announce the new classes in a little while after Yom Tov. We'll see what we learn next, but a real pleasure, and yesher koach for everyone learning with us.